Tradition has it that the seeds of a missionary Baptist ministry in the Benson area were planted by two ministers from the north traveling through eastern North Carolina. Upon inquiry about a missionary Baptist church, the two ministers found one elderly lady, Mrs. Tanner, who was of similar persuasion. Near her home, approximately 2 miles north of what is now the town of Benson, was the Rising Sun School, also known as Dog Eye School. Here, the itinerant ministers conducted a worship service. Although the anonymous ministers moved on, and although the little school has long been in disuse, the purpose of that meeting has lived on. The actual history of Benson Baptist Church dates to January 24, 1887. On that day, in the Rising Sun School, the church was organized by four ministers: J.L. Ennis, Allen Betts, J.M. Holloman, and A.N. Campbell. The church chose the name Bethany, the town near Jerusalem where Jesus often lodged with Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, and elected the Reverend J.L. Ennis as its first pastor. Services were scheduled for the fourth Sunday of each month. The Bethany Church began its spiritual existence with 5 charter members. On the day of organization, Mr. N.H. Gibbs and his wife Margaret were received by transfer of letter from the County Line Baptist Church, and 3 sisters, Sabra, Sarah, and Martha Hall, united by statement of faith. At the first church conference held on the Saturday before the 4th Sabbath in February of 1887, the mother of the 3 daughters, Miss Sabra E. Hall, joined the church by transfer of letter from the Concord Church in Cumberland County. On the following Sunday, 2 more members, united by transfer of letter, and 5 new converts to Christianity were baptized in the chilly waters of a nearby creek. A business meeting of the congregation, which was to have far-reaching consequences for the young church, was held on the Saturday before the 2nd Sabbath in September in 1887. At that time, the church voted to apply for membership in the Little River Association. This decision officially aligned the church with the program of Missionary Baptist and with the Baptist State Convention of North Carolina. At this same meeting, the name of the church was changed to conform to the name of the newly incorporated community which it served. Thus, the Bethany Baptist Church became the Benson Baptist Church. And in 1987, both the town and the church celebrated together their centennial anniversaries. The location of the first meeting place in the town of Benson is uncertain for the church. The first services in the town were held in a brush arbor. One tradition has it that this first modest meeting place was located on the present property of Miss James Peacock on West Church Street, next to the current site of the Benson Baptist Church parsonage. Another tradition places the location on West Main Street, adjoining the cotton gin owned by Mr. John D. Parrish. It is quite possible that both locations were used at different times. This improvised sanctuary was not long used, however, for in May of 1887, in the 5th month of the church's existence, a committee was named to buy land and erect a church building. The first church building of the newly organized congregation of Benson Baptist was erected in the part of the town now known as Brooklyn. It was built behind the home of Mr. Stephen O'Neill on land given to the church by Mr. O'Neill. It is most likely that this building was constructed late in 1887 or early in 1888. This simple structure housed the congregation and its activities until it was virtually destroyed by a violent windstorm on June 5, 1891. News of the church's disaster came to the attention of the Atlantic Coastline Railroad, which then donated to the church the lot on the northwest corner of West Church and North Wall Streets, the lot on which the present sanctuary now stands. Construction began immediately on the new site, and the completed frame building was dedicated on November 30th, 1891. The Reverend J. Hartwell Edwards of Goldsboro preached the dedicatory sermon. During the period from organization in 1887 until 1900, the church was blessed by the ministries of J.L. Ennis, Allen Betts, J.M. Holloman, A.N. Campbell, J.A. Campbell, J.J. Adams. During the summer of 1892, Mr. Holloman conducted a revival in which 19 people were baptized into the membership of the church. The meeting marked a significant advance in the spiritual strength of the church, for many who were to be future leaders made Christian commitments during the revival. 2 well-known pastors formed a father-son combination in the 1890s. Mr. A.N. Campbell, who served the church from 1893 to 1896, was succeeded by his son, Mr. J.A. Campbell, who served as pastor during 1896 to 1899. The younger Campbell is best known for his work in establishing the Buies Creek Academy, now Campbell University, an outstanding institution in the educational ministry located in Buies Creek. At the turn of the century, another well-known Baptist, the Reverend John M. Suttle, served the church. Mr. Suttle's ministry at Benson was in conjunction with his pastorate of the Smithfield Church. His 6-year tenure of service from November 1900 through September 1906 marked the longest pastorate of the church to that time. Upon Mr. Suttle's resignation, the church adopted a resolution from the deacons, then N.L. Hall, J.H. Boone, J.P. Kennedy, J.D. Parrish, and E.L. Hall, commending him for his untiring efforts through which the church grew from a small membership to its present strength. It was during the ministry of Mr. Suttle in 1903 that the church withdrew from the Little River Association to aid in the formation of the Johnston Baptist Association, of which it is still a member. During the period of Mr. Suttle's ministry, the church had services on a one Sunday a month basis and paid the pastor $100 during his last year of service. Mr. Suttle led the church to adopt the envelope system and pledge system of church finance still used today. With the coming of Reverend D.F. Putnam in the fall of 1906, the church expanded its ministry. Services were scheduled on the second and fourth Sundays of each month. The church entered an important phase of its ministry in 1912 with the coming of the Reverend J. M. Duncan as pastor. As the church grew, the frame structure, which had been in use since 1891, became obviously inadequate. Under the leadership of Reverend Duncan, and with the promise of Mr. Alonzo Parrish to pay 1/10 of the total cost, along with supplying all of the brick used in the building, the church voted to proceed with the construction of a new sanctuary on the same site of the existing structure. Mr. Duncan placed the first brick on the new church early in November of 1914. The sanctuary, modern and advanced for its day, stood as a symbol of the congregation's willingness to sacrifice for the glory and worship of God. The old church building was moved to 218 West Church Street. It was renovated and is now used as a residence owned by Mr. Shane Booth. The history of Benson Baptist Church includes not only obedience to the command to preach, but also to the command to exercise a healing ministry. During the memorable influenza epidemic of 1918, the Sunday school classrooms adjacent to the current sanctuary were converted into a temporary infirmary for men stricken with the disease. Although many were treated, only one man, a Mr. Crosby Smith, died in the church from this infectious killer. During the roaring 1920s, the Benson Baptist Church grew slowly but steadily. During that decade, the church made two significant steps forward. First, with the call of the Reverend C.C. Wheeler in 1920, the church voted to begin a full-time ministry of preaching and worship. For the first time since 1887, worship services were held every Sunday. The second stride forward was made in March of 1928 during the pastorate of Reverend J.E. Kirk, when the church voted to purchase a house for the pastor. The church obtained the S.E. Williams property, house and lot, for $1,930. That house served as the pastorum until it was moved in 1950, and a new house was built on the same lot. The ministers of the church during the 1920s were C.C. Wheeler, O.A. Keller, A.L. Benton, and J.E. Kirk. The Reverend A.L. Brown was called to the church in 1929 and served until 1934. The great financial tragedy of the late 20s was a preface to several lean years in the life of the church. Homes were lost and property values skidded. As a result, on January 29, 1938, the church voted to go on a half-time basis due to the fact of hard times. The future, said church clerk John R. Parrish in recording the business session that day, looks even harder. His words seem almost prophetic. All church finances suffered during the Depression years. The extent of the financial depravity was evidenced in church action on December 12, 1934, at which time the church voted to raise a budget of not less than $1,500. The deacons led an every member canvass to subscribe to this amount. The church was guided through these years of financial depravity by the Reverend Forrest L. Young from 1934 to 43, who came to the church at a salary of $75 per month. Reverend Young, in his 9-year pastorate, laid much of the groundwork for the advances of the church during the more prosperous days ahead. In 1943, the church voted to return to a full schedule of worship services and activities with the call of Reverend E.Y. Averett. Mr. Averett served the church for 2 years, 1943 to 1945, and during the last year of his ministry, the church adopted a budget of $4,850. Ministries of the next two pastors covered a period of 15 years and marked significant advances in the spiritual growth and physical expansion of the church. The pastorates of the Reverend Thurman B. Stone, 1945 to 1951, and the Reverend H. Otis Lanning, 1952 to 1960, coincided with the years of post-war advance and the prosperity and were years of great progress in the history of the church. During the ministry of Mr. Stone, two progressive steps were taken with regard to physical property. The first was the construction of a new home for the pastor. In February 1950, the church voted to sell the parsonage and the lot and to buy a lot at the corner of West Church and Lincoln Streets for the construction of a new home. 3 months later, however, this was reconsidered and rescinded, and plans were made to proceed with the construction of a new home on the existing property. The old parsonage was then sold to Mr. L.E. Stevens in the summer of 1950 and was moved to its present location at 202 North Wall Street. The parsonage was completed in May of 1951 at a cost of approximately $12,000. The upstairs remained unfinished until the summer of 1962, when it was completed at a cost of $2,500. The parsonage, built then, is still used today by our current pastor. The second significant step was taken on May 2, 1951, when the church voted to purchase the property of Miss J. H. Rose, adjacent to the sanctuary at 202 West Church Street, for $8,000. Educational facilities were inadequate in every department of the church, and the Rose home provided space for much-needed Sunday school departments and classrooms for children and young people. The annex, as it was known, served as the educational facility of the church until it was moved to make way for the construction of the present educational wing in 1960. The event for which the ministry of Reverend Stone is best remembered is the spiritual awakening which came to the church during a revival in 1951. The church participated in the simultaneous crusade, the Convention of North Carolina's unified evangelistic effort in the spring of that year. The local revival began on March 25th and continued through April 8th. During this 2-week period, some 70 people united with the church as members. At the two services on April 15, 1951, Reverend Stone baptized 48 people who made Christian commitments during the previous 2 weeks. People from 7 different denominations united with the church in that time period. In the words of Reverend Stone, it was a wonderful experience. The spiritual awakening of the church during 1951 was a fitting climax to the ministry of Reverend Stone, who left the church at the end of that year, culminating a 6-year period of spiritual and material advance. In 1952, the Reverend H. Otis Lanning began an 8-year ministry during which the spirit of advance continued. After Reverend Lanning assumed the pastorate of the church, the congregation continued to realize its limited physical facilities and began to think of further expansion. Educational space was still inadequate, and the sanctuary was in need of expansion and renovation. The latter project was adopted first, and in 1956, the church voted to proceed with the renovation of its place of worship. The internal structure of the sanctuary was changed, the seating capacity was increased by 150 people, the floor was fully carpeted, and an air conditioning system was installed. The total cost of the project, of which Dr. C.W. Sanders served as chairman, was approximately $38,000. Out of the work of a 14-member planning and survey committee headed by Mr. James W. Rose came the next phase of building and expansion. On August 27, 1958, the church voted to borrow $60,000 to add to the generous contributions of the members and to proceed with the construction of the present educational building. Actual construction began in April of 1959 under the supervision of a building committee composed of Dr. C.W. Sanders, chairman, W.A. Barber, W.P. Lee, James W. Rose, Ernest Strickland, and Charles Turlington. The building, erected and furnished at a total of $107,000, was dedicated on February 28, 1960. The building provided facilities for nursery departments through the youth department, had a fully equipped kitchen and one large room which served as an assembly room and a dining room known as the fellowship hall. With the completion of this building, a complete departmentalization of the Sunday school was possible for the first time, with Hiram Rose serving as general superintendent. The ministry of Reverend Lanning, however, cannot be measured in terms of material advances alone. During his pastorate, 175 people were baptized into the fellowship of the church, including 32 in 1953, 30 in 1954, and 33 in 1958. The conclusion of his pastorate on July 1st, 1960, brought 8 years of fruitful service to a close. A young seminary graduate, Harold Lee Alexander, became Benson Baptist Church's pastor in December of 1961. The membership and numerous visitors were thrilled Sunday after Sunday by the dynamic young minister and the articulate sermons which he delivered. The Reverend Alexander felt the call of God to serve in the chaplaincy of the U.S. Army. Thus, after serving our church for only 10 months, reluctantly resigned to answer that call. On January 14, 1962, Dr. Gaylord L. Layman assumed the pastorate of our church after completing his doctoral work and serving as instructor of preaching at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky. Under Dr. Layman's able leadership, our church implemented sound principles of business management and church finance. These principles are still serving us well. On the 75th anniversary homecoming, he researched the history of our church, which we still read today. Dr. Gaylord Layman and his wife Faith entered the contest for town logo, which they won and is still being used by the town of Benson today. The Reverend Alan Layman became our pastor on June 26, 1966. His dynamic preaching and vibrant personality brought numerous converts and new members to our fellowship during his short but fruitful ministry to our church and community. During the period of time Reverend Layman served our church, the basement of the education building was renovated to include an assembly room, along with small rooms to be used as Sunday school classrooms and storage rooms. Also during the Reverend Layman's ministry in our church, we began a kindergarten program for 5-year-old children in the fall of 1967. The pastor and church committee employed Miss Stacy Altry as the first teacher. This continued until 1965, when the public school system added kindergarten to its program. At this time, the Reverend Layman resigned in September 17, 1967, to accept the pastorate of the First Baptist Church in North Wilkesboro. Reverend Layman would return to preach at Benson Baptist for our Founders Day services in February of 2022. The preschool program continued as Miss Jean Murphy in 1975 used the church facility for a nursery school program, teaching 3- and 4-year-old children 3 days a week. In 1976, the church decided to assume full control of the nursery school. The preschool program closed in 2004 due to a lack of children enrolled in the program. The Reverend Harold M. Mitchell, a native of Georgia and a graduate of Mercer University and Southeastern Seminary, served our church as pastor beginning on March 10, 1968. His young family, with several children, was able to add to several areas of the church's ministry. Under his leadership, a regular meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous begun at our church. On March 1st, 1972, the Reverend Mitchell resigned to accept a call to 5 Points Baptist Church in Wilson. Reverend Mitchell returned to preach at Benson Baptist Church in October of 2022 for our homecoming services in celebration of our 135th anniversary. August 16, 1972, marked the beginning of the ministry to our church of the Reverend Donald M. Price. Mr. Price led us in several areas of growth, including renovation of the sanctuary and other facilities, rebuilding the pastorum after it was gutted by fire on December 31, 1980, and acquisition of the Woodall, Britt, and Smith properties west and south of the church to provide additional parking space. During the Reverend Price's years of ministry, a class for the visually impaired was started. In 1989, the church opened its facilities to the Surrender Group of Narcotics Anonymous, which continues to this day. Reverend Price resigned August 15, 1994. Reverend Larry D. Glover Wetherington and Dr. Lynn Buzzard served as interim pastors during this time. Reverend Kendall Cameron was welcomed into Benson Baptist Church on July 14, 1998. During his ministry, the property behind the garage was purchased from the town of Benson, and the bird property behind the educational wing was purchased. During his ministry, a new church bylaws was adopted. A building committee consisting of Dottie Williams, chair, Jimmy Rose, vice chair, Don Johnson, J.H. Langdon Jr., Braston Newton, Anita Tart, W.R. Lambert, and Jack Whittington was elected on April 21, 2002. Reverend Cameron used his outstanding knowledge of the Bible to lead the church in spiritual as well as numerical growth. He resigned on February 16, 2003, to accept the pastorate of First Baptist Church, Whiteville. Dr. Michael G. Cogdell, Dean of the Divinity School at Campbell University, was called to be interim pastor in March of 2003. It was a joy to have him as minister to our congregation during the time we were between resident pastors. He gladly stepped in to help the building renovation project that was started, and his service to the congregation was magnificent. On December 9, 2003, Craig Richardson was called as pastor and was ordained in our sanctuary on January 4, 2004. His decision was to purchase a home and not use the church parsonage. Reverend Richardson led the church in a groundbreaking ceremony for the addition and renovation of the church facility at a cost of $1,335,000 on November 27, 2005. He resigned as pastor on February 1, 2006. Upon Reverend Richardson's departure, Reverend Michael Edwards agreed to serve as interim in his absence and continue as minister of music and education. On March 5, 2006, the church called Reverend Edwards as pastor. He and his family moved into the church parsonage after some renovations and repairs were made. A dedication service for the building of Benson Baptist Church and its addition and renovation were held on November 19, 2006. Reverend Edwards led in this service, with Dr. Mike Cogdell having the spiritual prayer and the Reverend Kendall Cameron reciting the history of the church. Reverend Michael Edwards was a pastor who earnestly sought to serve the Lord with all his heart. His devoted walk with God was an example to all of us. He faithfully led us as pastor while he was here, resigning as pastor in August of 2011 to follow the Lord's calling for him at Mays Memorial Baptist Church in Virginia. Reverend Charles Royal was called to be the interim pastor in October 2011. Charles, in his informal yet knowledgeable way, preached to us and also gave his Wednesdays to us. Reverend Paul Burgess was called as our pastor in December of 2013. He was just 28 years old. Paul had this ingenious creativity in presenting his sermons, sometimes short skits using the youth, sometimes videos starring his young son Stephen, always creative. And who could ever forget Paul's clever costumes on special occasions like the Grinch during Advent? Paul resigned in August of 2017 to accept the pastorate of Winter Park Baptist Church in Wilmington, North Carolina. Dr. Andrew Wakefield was called to be the interim pastor in October 2017. Dr. Wakefield is the dean of Campbell University Divinity School and teaches New Testament Greek, New Testament survey courses, and courses on the writings of the New Testament. Almost 3 years ago, in January of 2020, our current pastor, Dr. Lawrence Powers, was called to serve at Benson Baptist. His tenure has not been an easy one, as just 3 months into his tenure, the world was halted to a stop by the COVID-19 pandemic. During that time, the church moved completely online for worship, Bible studies, church conferences, and more. We even elected deacons and hired staff members via fully online conferences. During this time, God was faithful to our church as we followed Christ together, and we today have returned to full programming and worship services in person, while also offering a virtual extension of worship for people to join us online. Even in this unprecedented time, God has been faithful to our congregation at Benson Baptist Church, and we have seen growth in all areas of the church, numerous baptisms and new members, and an increased presence in the larger Benson community. Outside of our senior pastorate ministry, programs in music, youth, and children have varied from a single leader in each to a 3-in-1 leader at other times. Realizing the importance of music and worship and the importance of music instruction, we have tried our best to provide for this vital area. Directing the chancel choir in recent years have been Autry Lewis, Dr. Fred Mallory, Dr. Paul Yoder, Annie Laurie Yarborough, Kenneth Killebrew, Joyce Harward, Carolyn Allman, William Massengale, Scott Rummage, Jeff Ertzberger, Chuck Allen, Meredith Best Blaylock, Michael Edwards, Christopher Langdon, Stephen Church, Todd Johnson, and David Woolsey. Serving as director of several choirs in recent years have been Martha Chapman Cohen, Judy Ramsey, Alan Campbell, Teresa Aiken, Al Marquardt, Linda Shearhouse, and Carolyn Langdon with the help of her husband, Rick. Also directing our contemporary worship band in a new position created in 2022 is Jordan Hines. Adding influence to our children and youth programs without regard to music have been Rick McDuffie, Terry Wingett, Kevin Green, Jeff Ertzberger, Michael Edwards, Stephen Fox, Chance Kuzma, Crystal Bell Pittman, Stephanie Bohannon, Tyler Wood, Joanna Capps, Michael Lassiter Sizemore, Natalie Ferris, Sean Ferris, Felicia Fox, Taylor Long, and our current Associate Pastor for Children, Youth, and Families, Reverend Will Rabin. In addition to these ministers, we have also served as a teaching congregation for various young adults exploring a call to ministry, including recently Muriel Lassiter, Taylor Long, and Ben Wright. Since 2020, our children have also been supported by a lively Associate for Children's Sermons, the Purple Otter, River. We've also been blessed with an administrative assistant, Debbie Champagne, who has served us for going on 23 years. For over 135 years, Benson Baptist Church has certainly lived into our vision statement of living together with Christ biblically, worshipfully, creatively, and missionally. Today, we have many in our congregation who were not here many years ago, but still call Benson Baptist Church home. As we move forward together, we know that Christ will do immeasurably more than all we could ask or imagine according to the power of Christ that is at work within us. And we can't wait to see where the future will take Benson Baptist Church for the next 135 years.